Hello and welcome to the Thayer Family Special, and this is a very special program that we're having today, and I have with me two guests who are representatives and very active in the Thayer Families Association. We have with us today Al Thayer Morton, who is president of the association. He is a resident of Rochester, New York, and we're very, very pleased to have him. Welcome, Al. It's nice to have you. And we also have, I guess, really the key player, if I may say so, in the Thayer Family Association. We have Patricia Thayer Muno. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you're the secretary, and of course you're from Beaverton, Oregon.
I'm family historian.
And you're the family historian. Okay, we want to get that right. And this week at Thayer Academy and at the Thayer House, they are observing a reunion of the Thayer families. And the Thayers, of course, arrived here in Braintree. The first Thayer arrived here in 1637. A brother arrived in 1641. And later another family member arrived here in 1660. So Braintree has really been, it could easily have been named Thayer instead of Braintree. The Thayers have such deep and wonderful connections here with the town of Braintree. And Al, perhaps you'd just maybe like to make a comment or two about your association, where you are the president, and perhaps you can just give us some idea of what is happening this week here in Braintree.
Well, the association was formed in roughly 1991, and it went through a growing process. I didn't become involved with the association until, what was it, 93? And we went through a period of trying to figure out just who was a member and who wasn't a member. The records weren't being kept at that point, and became a director in 1994. I believe it was a director in 94, wasn't it? So much has gone on. During the last 3 years, the membership has gone from about 100 people to well over 500 people. And we've had different programs. One of them most recently wrapped up last winter was sending a mailing to virtually every Thayer that we could find in the United States. There were, what, 6,000 of them that we mailed to?
7,000.
7,000. And pretty good response. Recently, we have a homepage on the internet, which we have found several members. And interestingly, they contact us. We don't know necessarily that they're going in and finding it, but if they search the web and find that Thayer Families homepage, they'll send an email to myself or to Patricia, and here's another new member. They're interested, want to hear more about it.
That's great. That's great. I think it's a wonderful thing to do, to bring people together and to have an identity, and again the heritage of the Thayers, as we know here in Braintree, certainly from the beginning, and of course we have Thayer Academy, which was founded by General Sylvanus Thayer. We have the Thayer House, which was General Thayer's birthplace. We have the Thayer Public Library. We have at least one street that I know of that is named after a Thayer. So we have a very, very rich history here for the Thayer family. And when you talk, and I like to talk to you, Trish, about genealogy and some of the research you've done, and we know it's kind of a two-phase thing. It goes out this way, but you also attempt to go back quite a ways as well. And I would just briefly mention that a few years back I was taking a trip to Ireland. My wife and I, our children gave us a trip to Ireland for one of our anniversaries. And so I decided, well, gee, this is great. I'll do a little family research myself. And it's incredibly difficult. I went to the Weymouth Town Hall and I got my grandparents' death certificates, and I thought I had a pretty good lead on things. And when I got to Ireland, I went to a church and we're looking for the records, and I had to go back 3 different times until finally I talked to the pastor at this particular church, and it turned out they had wonderful, wonderful records. except for the period of time I was looking for.
Right.
And
usually the case.
that seems to be all too often the case, I guess, when you're doing that research. So I can appreciate what you've gone through. Trish, you've got a marvelous bank of names that you've created over a period of time. Just tell us, I know we talked a little bit before the show, but perhaps you could tell us how this all began with you and how you got into this historical research. I think it's quite fascinating.
Okay, it backs up to my father, who had lost his father at the age of 3 months in the 1918 great influenza epidemic. And so he grew up not knowing about his Thayer heritage, and he was quite obsessed with wanting to know. And I remember at one point when I was about 10 years old, Dad had a dream. And in this dream, he believed that he was given 3 names that were the key to what he was trying to find. And he got up in the night to write these down, and he made a side trip, and by the time he got to a pen and a piece of paper to write it down, he'd forgotten the names. And he was very disturbed by that. And so through the course of time, when I became interested in this work, I set out to try to help my father in finding his Thayer heritage. And as a result of trying to find the parentage of my father's grandfather, I have accumulated the genealogical data of over 50,000 Thayers through the research of vital records and census records and personal correspondence with living descendants. I correspond with about 1,000 Thayer families presently. And I get up to 100 email messages a day as people find us through the internet, and this can be quite time-consuming.
Sure.
So, but it's very rewarding.
Oh, I'm sure it is. I'm sure it's fascinating. It really is. It has to be. 50,000 is a tremendous number. There's no question about it. Now, when you say 50,000 Thayers, do they all have the surname Thayer, or are we talking about folks who, for example, their mothers or grandmothers, or would this be? Yeah.
This would be the spouses and all those who carry the Thayer surname.
Okay.
And this is because of the confusion that there has been in the Thayer family due to the earlier publications that contained many errors. We wanted specifically to help every individual who carried the Thayer surname, and this is one of the reasons why we struggled to make this a surname organization rather than a lineage organization.
Right, right.
And anyone who had an interest in Thayers could participate and belong and find their lineage, whether they went back to one of the 3 immigrants or not.
Right. Now, tell me, when you started this, obviously you started with a small number. How did it grow? How did you reach out for additional people? I mean, you say you correspond with about 1,000 people, or there's about 1,000 that you have contact with. They must have come from different sources. You've already mentioned email, for example. You're on the net, but I would assume in the beginning you had to have some kind of a system where you reached out to folks, and it must have been something that you developed yourself, and I'm just wondering how you went about that.
Well, I started out with the determination that I would contact every one of those 7,000 Thayer families in the United States myself, if it meant that's what I had to do to find my great-grandfather's parents. So I was personally going to contact these individuals. I started out by writing to 80 families in the state of Maine.
I see.
Only one person responded in all of those 80 families. So it was quite discouraging. And by then, we had the Thayer Families Association organized, and I tried to encourage them to carry on this project. And thanks to the foresight of our president, he encouraged us to go ahead with that. And we asked for volunteers to help with the mailing project. Different members would mail to people in their respective states. And so we attempted to contact each of these 7,000 Thayer families to let them know of the genealogy project and that we're here to help them in any way that we can.
That's great. I guess the question I should ask is, just to back up just a little bit, is how did you know that there was 7,000 Thayer families?
Through the census records and through the, and this will probably answer your earlier question about where we got the information.
Yeah.
There are databases on, what is it, phone, what do they call the CDs that had these information?
The computerized, you mean?
Yes,
Yeah.
compact discs.
There are address programs and so forth that you
I
can
see.
buy for the
Okay.
computer, and this is
Okay.
what we use.
Well, this is recently what we've been using.
Yeah.
Now, originally, when you first started, you were just mailing letters.
Well, part of that has come from telephone directories in different parts of the country and so forth, that we would try to glean together and ask people to send, share addresses of their family members, so it just kind of grows a little bit as it goes along, and it continues to spread.
You must have an insatiable appetite for research. And that is a tremendous amount of work. By anyone's standard, that's a tremendous amount of work.
You know, it's really
Yeah.
funny because that was my phobia when I was younger.
That's marvelous. Now, if we could go back a little bit, I'd just like to go back to those three original settlers, so to speak.
Immigrants, yeah.
And as time went on, I think you mentioned, for example, that certain descendants tended to go to certain places.
Correct.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I can. The descendants of Richard, who was the younger brother and the second to come, settled here and remained in the Braintree area for generations and generations. And the descendants of Thomas, who came in 1637, he had one son whose name was Ferdinando. And Ferdinando went into Menden early on, and was one of the original settlers of Menden. And Ferdinando became the largest progenitor of their descendants in the world. He has the biggest amount. And but for some reason, those descendants then went up into New York and other regions, particularly New York.
Right.
And then from New York, they spread to the Midwest.
I see.
And so during the time they went to New York, and before 1850, when they were starting to settle in the Midwest, we have a gap in the records because of the censuses and the way that the information that was recorded, where we lose track of some of these individuals and who they belong to. So in addition to all of those for whom I can account and their correct lineage, I also keep a separate file of all Thayers by various surname spellings that I keep separate so that I can move them over to the main file if I find a connection.
Right.
The third immigrant was Nathaniel, and Nathaniel was a nephew to Thomas and Richard.
Right.
And he came in 1660, and he settled in Taunton. But their descendants intermarried,
I see.
and the most
He descended. Nathaniel, wasn't his aunt there in Taunton? Hadn't his aunt settled in Taunton before him? Wasn't there a Thayer that came, a woman who settled in Taunton, and then Nathaniel came?
the one that settled in Taunton came
Right.
last.
Yeah, right, in 1660. So, you know, you've kind of reversed the process, Al.
How's that?
They went to New York and to the Midwest. Well, you've come from the Midwest back to New York.
Well, as Tricia outlined, my family comes from Thomas and
Right,
Ferdinando.
yeah.
They did move out to New York.
Yeah.
Then they went on to Michigan, and
Right.
they turned up in the 1860 census, but not in the 1850 census.
Oh, I see.
Then Carolyn and I decided that it would be a good career move to move to Rochester, New York
Yeah.
with the company.
Yeah.
So that's how I came back and
I
got
think
into
that's
Rochester.
fascinating
But
after all those
Yeah.
decades.
Found a big nest of my family in
Right.
Barry. Yeah, Barry in Orleans County in New York, and I'd never researched that county. So
That's marvelous, isn't it? Isn't that interesting, though, that it is kind of reversing the process,
Going
and you've
home.
come full cycle
I'm
now,
home.
because you're right back at the
Yep.
home here in Braintree, so that's a wonderful thing. Trish, I'd like to ask you one other thing. As you were speaking, I guess it was Fernando, as you say, had the most descendants, and as you said that, you mentioned throughout the world as opposed to in the United States. And I understand that some of the Thayers did immigrate to other areas. Is that correct?
You mean to leave here and go to other areas?
Well, I don't know where they left here and what other areas are, but I mean there are Thayers apparently in other countries. Is that correct?
Well, first of all, let me explain. It was the concept that all Thayers in this country had descended from one of these three men.
I see.
And as I did my research, I found evidence of over 100 heads of families who immigrated at later times during the 1800s.
Oh, I see.
And at present, we have the three colonial immigrants, and we also have evidence of a Benjamin who immigrated to Maine in the 1600s, and there was a George there who came to Virginia in the early 1700s, and that accounts for a large amount of the descendants. But we do have people in the present day who have left this country and settled in Australia and various other places.
That's what I was referring to. I thought some had gone elsewhere, and that's fascinating. Australia is...
And the most interesting thing that Massachusetts was the capital for Thayers.
Right.
But today, there are very few here. The majority of the Thayers live in the state of California or in Florida.
I see.
And the second most populous state for Thayers was the state of New York.
I see.
And that's where we get a lot of our unplaced Michigan Thayers from, is because we can't find where they connect back to New York.
I see. Well, now, could we talk just for a moment about, because here in Braintree, again, the Thayer name does mean a lot. There's no question about it. In particular, though, there's a lot of attention paid to General Sylvanus Thayer. And could you just kind of fit him into the picture for us, so to speak?
Well, I think the most interesting thing about General Sylvanus Thayer is that there's very few people in the United States who have the Thayer surname without the concept that they were, let me see, how do I put this? A lot of our people think they are directly descended from General Sylvanus Thayer, whereas he never married or had any children. But it's because he was so famous, and this is the one person that they can associate with that was famous.
Right.
And so from their grandfather and their great-grandfather and their great-great-grandfather, they have heard, we are related to General Sylvanus Thayer, and they translate that to mean, I'm a direct descendant.
And just to make that clear, he was a bachelor all his life.
Right.
And
Never married or had any children.
No children at all. But he was quite an individual, quite a fascinating individual, a brilliant person. Of course, West Point and Thayer Academy and so forth. Now, who did he descend from? Do you know? Do you know how he fits into the lineage?
Yes, he descends from Richard.
Richard.
Yes.
Who was, again, an original. Was he the 1637 settler here?
1641.
Or 41.
He was the second one.
1641.
Right.
So he comes down that branch of the family, so to speak.
And the group that settled in this area, built it, and were founders of Braintree, and built this area up, and remained in this area the longest.
Yeah. Now, do you know yourself which one of the Thayers you descended from? I know we've established you're from Fernando, right?
Ferdinando.
Ferdinando,
Yeah.
right.
I would have to guess that I belong to the line of Richard, simply because my family, because of the pattern, shows that the descendants of Richard remained in this area the longest, and my great-grandfather supposedly was born and raised in Boston.
Oh, I see. Okay, so
I
that's
feel very
reasonable.
confident that's what I will eventually find.
Right. Now, when you say eventually find, where are we going from here? Tell us what you're doing.
Well, since I have thoroughly checked all of the vital records and the census records and and anything that I could get my hands on that might give me proof of the parentage of my great-grandfather, I have only one thing left to do, and that's the 1880 census, which is now being entirely computerized, every name, by the LDS Church. And we have the names of the individuals who appeared in the 1880 census soundex, where there were families that had children 10 years of age and younger. If there were children that were over 10 years of age, even if there were dozens of them living at home, they were not included in this special index. So once this project is completed, I believe it's supposed to be in next summer in 1998, that will be the only open door left for me.
I see. Now, when you said LSD, LDS, Latter-day Saints,
Church
is that
of
the
Jesus
Mormon
Christ of
Church?
Latter-day Saints.
Because they have done, absolutely, they're the greatest resource for genealogy, I think, in the country, privately at least.
They preserve the records for the entire world, and they are housed in a mountain vault
in Utah?
in Utah,
Yeah.
up in a canyon, in a granite canyon,
Have you been there?
many times.
Wow. That's quite a thing to see in itself, I'm
It's
sure.
quite a service to the whole world.
And I know locally there are Mormon churches, and you can go to them. They have, I guess we'd call them library or research areas, and you can go and look up names and families and so forth. So it's just a
Well, they do
tremendous
have-
thing.
They have the branch libraries in
Right,
almost
yeah.
any major city, and they're called family history centers. And they are open and available to the public, and it is my understanding that the general public are more frequent visitors there than the LDS people themselves,
I'm sure that's true. Sure
because of the interest in the roots.
Yeah. Now let's talk for a minute, if we may. You've got a very busy week here in Braintree. First of all, thank goodness we have wonderful weather. We don't always have, but June is usually pretty good. You've had a great week, weather-wise, certainly, and you've had a wonderful schedule of events and so forth. And would you share with us, Al, perhaps you could begin, share with us some of the events that have been going on this week and some of the happenings. And we're filming on Friday, the 20th of June. I know there's one more day at least to go, but perhaps we could just back up and give us an idea of what's taking place this week. And
Actually, it's not particularly exciting what's gone on Wednesday and Thursday. It's just business meetings.
Just kind of
right.
organizational things.
Today at noon, some of Patricia's family representatives began setting up their displays, their lineage, and their charts and what have you at the, is it the auditorium at the Thayer Academy?
Yes.
I can't remember the name.
Yeah.
It's below the main library.
Yes.
And that's going on now. It should be going on until about 5 o'clock. And then tomorrow at 11 o'clock, excuse me, we'll have a luncheon at the Thayer Academy outside, the weather being what it is, and it will last from 11 until 1 o'clock. At about noon, we'll start registering people that have come so that we can have a record of who did come to the meeting. And then at 1 o'clock after the luncheon, the main yearly or annual meeting of the Thayer Families Association will take place. That'll run until about 5. We hope to wrap it up a little earlier than that. And then dinner at Amelia's at 7 o'clock.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Down at Marina Bay. That's a beautiful spot, too. Very nice spot.
And we've been working up these plans now for, what, 6 months?
I was just, now, accommodation, how many folks are registering, or how many folks have indicated that they're coming?
Just about 100 are pre-registered. You never know who's going to just show up at the door, which we've allowed some latitude for that happening too, because each previous year that's happened.
I see.
So,
well, I imagine some local people might not have pre-registered and would be easy.
We would love
for them to
that.
come.
well, they're more than welcome.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So roughly 100 then that are here now and participating in the program. what sort of business, you said the business, what sort of thing are you doing in terms of the business meeting? What do you need to get into and to take care of? And
Just refining little things in the bylaws of
Definition.
Yeah, definition, exactly.
I see.
And working on, we just had a director resign, and the board elected a new director, and setting up just a mechanism of exactly how the nominating committee is to work in coming up with a name or names for a particular position. That had never been defined before because the situation had never come up before.
I see.
So
That makes sense. If a person has the name Thayer, now you've suggested that most of the Thayers would seem to be related to one of the three original settlers that we spoke of. But if somebody has the surname Thayer and they learn of the families association and they express an interest in becoming part of it, is there a way that you have, or do you, I guess the answer is, the question is, do you do some research to establish that indeed they are part of this lineage?
not in
I think
order,
I know what you're asking.
not in order to belong to the association, but if Patricia has a service available if they're trying to find their roots, that for a very nominal charge, she will help them find their roots all the way back to, if she can, all the way back to one of the three immigrant ancestors.
1500.
Yeah.
I established a Thayer pedigree referral service where people can write to me and ask questions about their ancestry, and for a very nominal fee and even a reduced fee for TFA members, I will provide them with a personalized pedigree printout from their either themselves or their latest Thayer ancestor back to the year 1500 if I have their connection. If I don't have their connection, I don't charge them anything. And this has been beneficial also because of the number of individuals in my unplaced file. They're able to help me often to make the connection so that they can be moved over with the main group.
That's great. Speaking of, now when you said 1500s would be Gloucestershire in England, is that correct?
Don't ask me to pronounce, I think Gloucester. Thornbury is where they came from.
Thornbury, Gloucestershire, England, I believe, if I remember reading it correctly. And that, again, has there been any indication of family that remained there? Members who did not come over but remained there. Is there any knowledge of that?
I got an email message from someone this last week that told me that they had met someone in Japan who lives just a few miles from Thornbury, and that they said that they would go home and try to make a connection. I do correspond with their family that lives in Bristol, which is not very far. And at this point, we haven't found a connection between the families.
I see.
If the records remained extant, we could probably find us, but that's a very early time period for the records to
Well, it certainly is, but it's kind of fascinating to think about, because there'd be these parallel, histories, one in England and one in the United States. Let me ask you one last question now. The Thayers came to this country in the 1600s. They came as freedmen, or freemen, as I recall it, which means that they received grants of lands from the king and so forth. They settled here. Now, 150 years later, or maybe a little less, we had a revolution. What happened to the Thayers in the revolution? Was there a loyalist faction and a revolutionary faction, or it's kind of just...
I should have brought my listing of Thayers who joined the revolution, who served in the revolution. It's very inspiring because the Thayers are an entirely patriotic group of people and a very proud family. I've never seen a family that is so proud And that's a
Great.
wonderful thing.
It sure is.
But
That's wonderful.
many in the Civil War also.
Yeah.
The king wasn't particularly happy, though.
Certainly not. Well, on that note, we'll just mention the fact that we have a nice picture here of General Sylvanus Thayer, and we're going to go to a break right now, and I'll be back in a minute. We'll be right back. Welcome back to our discussion here today with the members of the Thayer family. We're here with Al Thayer Morton, who is the president of the Thayer Family Association, and with Tricia Thayer Muno, who is the historian for the family, and we've been discussing, as you've heard, many of the contributions and many of the activities of the Thayer Families Association, and would like to continue along with that discussion. It's fascinating. I'm enjoying it immensely, and I'd like to, we mentioned as we went to the break, you mentioned the spirit of patriotism of the Thayers at the time of the Revolutionary War, and that there were many who participated at that time. And somewhat tongue-in-cheek, I asked were there any of them who were loyalists. It doesn't sound to me like there were. They were all pretty much on board with this great American experience. After the Revolutionary War and after we settled as a country, we went through, which even to this day is one of the most terrible ordeals the country could possibly suffer, with the Civil War. And it caught up a lot of families and brought a lot of pain. In the end, it came out the way it should. But the Thayers, again, came to the forefront and went forward in this. And would you tell us about that, Trish?
They were really wonderful people when it came to protecting what they believed was right. Mm-hmm. And I don't have the exact number of how many soldiers that we had mm-hmm. in the Civil War. I know that there are something like 242 Thayers that served in the Revolution. There are very many more than that in the Civil War. Mm-hmm. But we have some really fantastic stories about how some of them had survived. Mm-hmm. Andersonville, one of our descendants, wow. Had to amputate his own feet in order to survive Andersonville.
In Andersonville?
Yeah. And it's really very enlightening and mm-hmm. very touching. Yes. When you realize the sacrifices that they had made.
Could you tell us one or two other stories about those who went through the Civil War and survived? And certainly Andersonville. That in itself is.
Or the one in the Andersonville.
Yeah, that's quite a.
That's the only one I can think that comes to mind right now.
That's okay. We'll be here for a few more minutes. What are the other things, Trish, that during the course of this work that you've been doing? What is it, about 8 years actually that you've been doing this as an association, that is, Families Association?
91 to 90.
I have been doing...
Six years.
As an association.
The association.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to.
But Tricia has put in many more.
And you've been at it a lot longer than that.
23 years.
23 years, my goodness.
Almost 24.
Family representatives, that's something that you kind of created as a means of reaching out to their family members. Tell us about that, Trish.
When I would notice that some of the individuals that I correspond with were particularly alert and knowledgeable about their own lives, I would ask them if they would be interested in serving as a family representative for all the descendants in that particular line. And one of the things that I would ask them to do, or several of the things I would request of them, is to serve as ambassadors to the Thayer Families Association, and that they would try to help encourage other members in their family to participate. The main thing that they do is coordinate the research, so that they are coordinating all of the research for the descendants in their line. They are collecting the photographs and the stories, and then this family representative sends this information to me, and I have about 48 of them all over the country. And this also helps these individuals to feel that they have a part and a contribution to make. They're less likely to lose interest. And in most family associations, you will find that after a short period of time, once the individuals have found the information that they're seeking, they will lose interest and drop out. So it's a continuous battle to try to keep up the encouragement so that they will stay with us, and we try to help them strengthen their respective family lines and in
so you got 48 of them across the country, all working it. By the way, do you have contact with any of the folks who went, for example, to Australia? Do you have contact with any of them?
I do.
You do? Okay.
Close contact, yes. Not necessarily by email, but through the letters.
Letters and
but I have found a Thayer that is an immigrant directly from England to New Zealand in just the last month, and they correspond with me over the internet, and they are anxious to try to find
make a connection.
Yeah.
That's great. How about Canada? Did any go to Canada? Or,
during the revolution, we had a number that went up there. We don't have proof that any of them were
loyalists.
Right. They were, but they went with other, with their wives, whose family members were going up there to escape the revolution. And
because that did happen a great deal, especially in the New England area.
Some of the descendants of those individuals still remain in Canada. I was in contact with one in just the last week, and a great many of them came back and settled down in Vermont and New Hampshire.
Oh, yes.
So there's a large number of those individuals in those two states.
So now we've got obviously Massachusetts, Maine, Michigan, New York, California, and Florida. What about the rest of the states? Do you have? I mean, those seem to be the biggies, so to speak. But are there any other areas, or are there any particular locales that seem to attract the family, so to speak?
Yes, there were.
I must say, the ones that went to California and Florida have to have the highest IQs.
My own family went to California. My own family went there and remained, and then trickled up into Oregon. But
which is beautiful area too.
Thank you. I know Michigan has an awful lot of Thayers, and why they were attracted to Michigan, I'm not sure.
I'm glad you said that, because I need
No, I don't mean it that way. I've never been in the state of Michigan, but it just and it's probably because of my ignorance about the state that I don't know why they went there. But there were an awful lot of Thayers who also went to Ohio, and Ohio seemed to be pretty much a stopping off place as they went west.
Heading west, sure.
And the fewest number of our Thayers live in the South. And there's very few Thayers in the state. I don't think we have, but maybe a half a dozen who lived in the state of Delaware.
Oh, I see.
And but we have some very wonderful family members who come from South Carolina, and they are here with us today, and we're very happy to have them with us.
That's very nice, isn't it? So you really do touch all geographical areas of the country. Al, I have to give you a chance to defend Michigan. I know it's a wonderful place. What sort of occupations did the folks have out there?
Ooh, let's see. Painter. There was a cobbler, and these are the only ones that I can remember.
Sure.
A painter, barn painter, I think that he was listed as. A cobbler. And we have some evidence of a horse thief, but we don't talk about him too much.
That's kind of in the back, right?
I think the reason why there are so many Thayers in Michigan is because they probably applied for this grant of homestead land as a block.
Of course.
And each moved out there to his acreage. And when we looked at the 1980 census, we'd find one here, and then a bunch in another county, and nothing scattered in between.
Yeah.
So
that makes a lot of sense, of course. Homesteading has attracted a lot of people in the Midwest and
they probably traveled out there as a group.
Right.
and then split up. And my family, I believe, went through Canada. They crossed at Niagara Falls.
I see.
And then through Canada, and then crossed somewhere around Sarnia.
Into the Michigan area.
Right.
And, do you know what brought your family to California? What, how they happened to
Gold.
move that way? Gold? Did they get any?
Not that I know of. I just found out this in the last couple of weeks that my own grandfather was a gold miner. I know he didn't get any. And that and mild climates.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm told that the Thayers love the sea.
Well, that's an interesting point too. Now, the Thayers who were here early in the 1600s, obviously being in the Braintree area, they were close by to the sea. I assume many were farmers. I know that, again, the Sylvanus Thayer homestead was farmland to a great extent, I believe. Were any of them seafarers in this area, do you know, in the Boston area, the Braintree area? Or do you know the occupations, I guess is what I'm saying, of the earliest Thayers in this area?
A lot of the, you're asking about their occupation?
Yes.
A lot of them in the early time period were farmers and cordwainers, which would be the shoemakers.
Oh, I see.
In the 1800s, we started seeing a lot of the shoemakers. But prior to that time, it was farming, and I think almost without exception, the early people who went up into New York were farmers.
I see.
And
okay. So, and that, of course, that is kind of to be expected to some extent, but then again, it seems like it was either seafaring or farming. It was one or the other to a very large extent, but it's always interesting when, again, if I may go back to General Sylvanus there, obviously he set off on a totally different track in his career, and a very long and distinguished career, military career, and then a career as an educator, and certainly again participating in town government and our library. I think our library was one of the first in the state, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and again that was due to his sponsoring it and actually financing what is truly a public library. And I don't know if you're aware of it, but some of the library members are elected and some are appointed. And I think the appointments go back to, again, the Thayer family, who they had this interest because, again, of their development of it, where they actually participated in the beginning as people who oversaw the library. So such a diverse history in terms of participation and in terms of
we have a wide diversity of professions, a lot of professional people, and we're very proud of our people who have been contributing members to society.
Speaking of that, there is one I would like to ask about currently. You have a member of the family who is very involved with the Defense Department at the present time, right? Tell us a little bit about that. He's a fascinating...
You're speaking of James Burdett there?
I believe I am. Yeah.
Jim is a personal friend of mine, and he lives in the same city as I do.
Oh.
And Jim is a person that I went to when it was obvious that I had too much information not to share, and asked Jim for help in publishing. And Jim said to me, I will go back east to Braintree, and I'll meet with Hobart Hawley and Philip Thayer, who are both now deceased, and we'll get the ball rolling, and we'll get the association going to give you the support that you need to get this work published. And he did that. And
now, what is he doing now? Isn't he involved in some work, as I say, for the...
Jim is an advisor to the Secretary of the Army.
Right.
And the country keeps him, sending him all over the world, and you would think that the national security was more important than Thayer Families Association. Anyway, we're going to miss Jim again this next week, and he's very busy. As I'm thinking, I was thinking about the Thayer surname, and when you were talking about shoemakers,
yes.
The three immigrants who came to this country were all shoemakers. And if you go back even further than that, then their ancestors in England were likely the same, and farmers. and the Thayer surname derives from the word Thayer, T-A-Y-E-R, which means a tanner of leather or a worker in leather.
see.
So the bullock has somewhat become a symbol of the family.
Yeah, that's very interesting, isn't it? What other types of occupations are you seeing now? Again, you have somebody working with the Defense Department or the Department of the Army. Al is very involved with pharmaceuticals and Rite Aid. Is that correct? The Rite Aid firm. What other sort of...
All walks.
Yeah.
All walks of life. We do have a high number of professional people. There has been a tremendous pride in this family and honor that has been has come to the family from the rest of society, and we have people that have contributed in all walks of life. Educators, doctors, lawyers, and many of the Thayers in the early time period in the 1700s became very wealthy people and very highly educated and influential, and some of these families remain today.
When you say they became wealthy and influential, I think the important thing here is that just from the way you speak of the family, obviously they did it on their own, so to speak. They worked hard to get where they're at. It didn't just fall to them. They worked hard to achieve whatever position they may have achieved. Is that not the case? I mean, certainly it wasn't handed to
Thayers
them.
are overachievers.
Yeah, okay. All right. 100 people here today. Tomorrow, hopefully, it'll be 100 or perhaps a little bit more. You're going to have a nice time at Thayer Academy. Luncheon. Is there a program in the morning? You mentioned the afternoon program, and I'm not sure I heard. Is there a program prior to the luncheon?
No, the only thing that we thought about doing that, but then the weather became too much of an iffy question.
Sure.
So we actually decided to gather at the Thayer house.
I see.
Sylvanus Thayer's house. And then move across the street at 11 o'clock for the luncheon.
I see. Okay. And what time is the luncheon? That's
Luncheon is
right at
from
noon, or-
11 until 1.
I see. Okay. Well, I look forward to dropping by, and it's just a great example of a family that has really pulled together and stays together, and a wonderful bond, and a great heritage, wonderful heritage. You've got an awful lot to be proud of. You truly do, and we're just delighted that you come home to Braintree and spend this time with us, and we've always been immensely proud of the contributions that's been made here from the beginning, really.
We're here to pay honor to those.
I mean, Plymouth Rock was only 17 years prior to the first fair. Richard, is that right? He was the
Thomas.
first. Thomas, I'm sorry. Thomas, 17 years after the Pilgrims arrived in Plymouth, he was here in Braintree. So that's there's not many that can go back that far. That's for sure, and have such a wonderful, rich heritage to look back on. And I think equally important, as I've already said, is the fact that you can bond together, these 300 years plus later, and still have such a strong family tie. Again, we're happy to have you here in Braintree and welcome you. And that's it for now, folks, and we'll talk to you again later. Thank you very, very much for coming in.